The Supreme Court ruling that overturned 50 years of abortion rights continues to make waves across the country, including in Ohio, in politics and in the courts, where even as one abortion clinic prepares to close, a lawsuit is filed to restore abortion access in the Buckeye State. Welcome to Columbus on the Record. I'm Ann Fisher, sitting in for Mike Thompson this week. Midterm elections are usually bad for the party that holds the presidency, and Democrats have been bracing for big upsets in November, but the abortion issue has given some reason to hope, including in Ohio. Target Smart Polling found that Ohio women out-registered Ohio men by an 11-point margin in the 2 months after the June 24th Dobbs decision. Julie Carr-Smythe, these women are younger, they're under 35, they live in urban areas, and they're likely to vote Democratic. How relevant are these numbers going forward?
Well, I do think they're relevant. I think we have to take them with a little bit of caution because you don't have to declare your gender on a registration form, and so we don't have exact, precise numbers from a state entity. But this polling that is this analysis that's showing that certainly means they are going to be pushing that issue, and that is probably what's motivating these folks. I mean, we don't know everything about it, but it would seem to make a lot of sense.
And just going forward, I mean, I think the Ohio abortion clinics last week filed a lawsuit in Hamilton County Common Pleas Court to block the current ban on doctors performing abortions after cardiac activity is detected, which is about 6 weeks into pregnancy. I'm wondering if those kinds of news items trigger more going forward.
Well, I think that, definitely if you're paying attention to the abortion issue, you recognize that abortion rights are nearly gone in the state of Ohio under the current law. And if you care about that issue and about access to that procedure, then you might want a sea change in the political control over our laws.
I'm wondering, Mike Miller, just going back over time, it's been a long time since we've had something to sort of examine in this way. 50 years of rights are gone, and now it's creating this whole new constituency. Maybe it's not a new constituency, but it's a burgeoning one because of that. And it's kind of interesting to think about.
Well, I think that consistency, and particularly the people who have recently registered, as Julie said, are unquestionably Democrat voters, in my opinion. How much a difference is it going to make, I don't know. I believe I saw something where that number equates to about 1% of what they expect the vote to be. In Ohio, that has gone the last couple of times for president anyway, about 8% for the Republican. So I don't think it'll have that great of an outcome. Now, you say the publicity, this and that. I can't imagine anybody who is even thinking about voting who does not know about the abortion issues. I mean, it's been every single day. So I don't think what happens in Dayton or the clinics and so forth is going to have any change because everybody knows about it anyway.
Do you think, Desiree, it's a building block process at that point as far as building that constituency up?
I think that abortion is an issue that is very concrete. Everyone knows what it is, right? And so now that it is a right that has been snatched away from people, it was a wake-up call to those who said, now, wait a minute, what happened? And the Democrats are reaping the benefit of that. We don't have to explain what an abortion is, right? The average voter or the average non-voter, they already know what it means. And so now that we see this excitement or this energy among women, probably across all party affiliations, to register to vote, is a big signal to the Democrats and Republicans who've been fighting to ban abortion, and for Democrats who've been sort of waving the white flag for a long time of like, hey, this is something that can be taken away if you don't vote. And people have been like, well, whatever. And now that it has been taken away, they are trying to vote. And so we will see what happens in November. But I think it is energizing for the Democratic base and for women across the state who don't identify with either party.
You know, I was just kind of interested in this. I was talking to an abortion provider last week, and she said that she still has people coming into her office that don't realize that it's not legal anymore for all intents and purposes in Ohio. It's still not completely out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there has been a lot of focus on it, but this is a restriction that brings it down to, about 6 weeks after pregnancy, after the fetal cardiac activity is detected. And so the vast majority of people who were obtaining abortions in Ohio are going to be sent to another state at this point. And so much is changing in the surrounding states. You look at Indiana that passed restrictions that are going to be taking effect in mid-September. Even Michigan has gone back and forth on a few court decisions. So there's just a lot of confusion across the board about what is accessible, which is a very foreseeable consequence of the U.S. Supreme Court returning this to a state-by-state decision.
But Desiree makes a really interesting point that, this is not an ECOT, this is not an HB6 scandal even. This is not something that you really have to take apart for the voters. And I do think that you're right in that we haven't had an issue like that in Ohio for a long time. We've had these very complicated, very in the weeds type of issues that the Democrats have not done a very good job of grabbing onto in the past cycle. So it'll be interesting to see if it makes a difference.
Okay, the Democratic voter registration bump from the Supreme Court abortion ruling hasn't translated to Nan Whaley, the Democratic nominee for Ohio governor in fundraising or in buzz. Whaley, who supports abortion rights, has fallen way behind in fundraising against Republican incumbent Mike DeWine, who signed into law the 6-week ban on abortion in Ohio. The latest independent poll had DeWine up by 15 points, and he just won the endorsement of Donald Trump. Desiree Timms, what's the equation here for Nan Whaley?
Well, I think there have been a number of polls that have been publicized. The Whaley campaign and Ohio Democratic Party also released a poll from Lake Research that showed Nan Whaley up, and that poll oversampled Republicans. And so I think, again, to go back to abortion, this is an opportunity for Nan Whaley to latch on and climb up the ladder to win this race. When she announced her campaign, I'm sure she knew it would be an uphill battle, an uphill climb to beat Governor DeWine, but abortion has been a gift in the perfect storm, along with Donald Trump endorsing Governor DeWine. DeWine has, for a very long time, sort of avoided Trump when he came to Ohio for multiple events and opportunities, or tries to lean center right, even though he legislates closer to the far right. So this endorsement from Donald Trump is just another bump for Nan Whaley's case that Governor DeWine is out of touch, and he's not the future of Ohio. So I think it's an opportunity for her, and again, the polling industry is very confusing at times. Multiple polls are showing multiple things. But again, the high registration and the new registrants among women registering to vote says a lot.
You made the point earlier, Mike Miller, though, that it's really a very small percentage as far as this new registrations go. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are about down ticket. If Nan Whaley doesn't do better at the top, even though there's been these bumps, what are your thoughts about down?
Well, I think that Governor DeWine will win rather easily. I look at when we talk about Nan Whaley's raising money, it's interesting that we looked at the money that the Democrat gubernatorial candidate had raised going all the way back, I think, to, let's see, Ted, what do I want to say?
Ted.
The governor.
Strickland.
Strickland, yeah. And other than Fitzgerald, which was, sort of an odd situation there, she is substantially below what Corduroy made, all of them. So I would think if the Democrats think that she's really going to win this thing, or even make it really close, I would expect a lot more money to be flowing her way, and it isn't. Now, maybe there's reasons for that I'm unaware of, but I think that she is not going to win this election.
I think that by the same token, we usually say you have to have money to win. But speaking about this abortion issue, and there is a lot going on messaging-wise across the country. So this sort of vote Democrat idea that national groups are putting up everywhere, all over, hoping to sweep the Dobbs decision into a Republican defeats in the fall. And so I think that there's a case that can be made that the Democrats might do better than we traditionally would think if they're doing the job of just saying, you know, the entire Republican Party, and we just saw the Biden address related to the MAGA Republicans and trying to make the case for his party as sort of upstanding or standing for democracy itself. These kind of messages could resonate in Ohio and nationally, even without money.
You think it might tighten it up? I think as we get closer, usually it would be likely that it would tighten up. But do you think it could make that much of a difference?
Well, I don't know that we've been tested post Donald Trump as to what the Republicans are going to do. You know, there's one theory that the MAGA Republicans are only about 20% of the party. And that means that the rest of the Republicans, you know, maybe they're for DeWine, but would they cross over if they care about abortion, which more than half of Ohioans do? I just think there's a lot of factors there.
Yeah, and you know, speaking of that Trump endorsement of DeWine, surprise, and what do you think how that rolls out?
Yeah, it was a
Jesse?
kind of interesting one. Former President Donald Trump didn't endorse Mike DeWine in the GOP primary, which was a four-way race, and then decided to endorse about 2 months before the end of the election. I mean, Mike DeWine has said all along that he would accept or, you know, be happy to have Trump's endorsement, but it's not something that he and his campaign have like run after. To your point, he hasn't appeared at a Trump rally in quite some time. There was an instance where Lieutenant Governor John Husted was at a rally and like asked people to wear masks, and that elicited some boos and opposition. And so I don't think you can describe Mike DeWine as anti-Trump by any stretch of the imagination. He isn't former Governor John Kasich, but they have not been, you know, lockstep. Mike DeWine isn't saying that the election was rigged or anything like that.
I was a little surprised that Trump endorsed, but then as soon as the latest polls, independent polls came out, showing him 15 points ahead of Namuele, that made me think, well, he likes to get behind the winner, too.
That's exactly right. I don't think there's any question about it. That's why he did it.
Yeah.
He's obviously not close to DeWine, or is DeWine close to Trump. But, you know, back to this abortion thing, the Democrats are doing this, as they should. If I were a Democrat, I'd be doing the same thing. What else is there to talk about? They're trying to hide the inflation rate, this terrible state we're in, the gas prices. I mean, nationally, we are in the worst shape we've been in many, many years. So what are they going to talk about? They're going to talk about something that may help them, and they've got to ignore all this other stuff. Just don't even bring it up. Let's hit abortion, 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 and see if that, you know, tops everything. And I just don't think it will.
I think there are a number of opportunities. President Biden is in town today for a ribbon cutting for the Intel factory and plant. That's going to create a lot of jobs here in Ohio. So if I'm an Ohio Democrat on the campaign trail, I'm certainly going to talk about Intel and tell young people you don't have to flee the state and go to Silicon Valley to get a job in tech. You have those opportunities right here in Ohio. And hey, for the people who were scammed by for-profit colleges, President Biden and the Democrats have helped usher in $10,000 of student loan debt. There was making sure everyone had the shot for COVID. And so, yeah, while we are in a situation with the economy right now, we are also in a situation with COVID-19, which is still very much present.
Okay, so when Steve Dakin was a member of the State Board of Education, he led the search for a new state superintendent until he resigned to make a pitch for the job himself. And he got it, but resigned a few weeks later when questions about the ethics of the process emerged. Jesse Balmer, the board has moved ahead to start to replace Dakin, but there are still questions about whether the board violated state ethics law. And then there's this issue of some texts that you reported on, some text messages between board members. What do we know?
Yeah, so I think I and other reporters are trying to get down to the bottom of how this all happened. As you explained, it was a little confusing. Steve Dakin was in charge of the search and then resigned and put his hat in the ring. He got the position over a perhaps more conservative option for leading the K-12 education, and then before he got his first paycheck, resigned. And part of the question is whether there were any violations of Ohio ethics laws during this, whether he helped direct the search and then got the job himself, whether this was a new position, at which point maybe he couldn't have even applied for a whole year. So the text messages just show how different members of the State Board of Education were reacting to this information as it was becoming public through the media and just through conversations. And some of them were saying, you know, Steve Dakin did nothing wrong. You know, he wasn't as involved as we might think. I think Steve Dakin's decision to leave before he got that paycheck indicates something.
You know, I know criminal law is your stock and trade, Mike Miller, but just having him go from being the head of the search committee to being the guy who gets the job himself, it just sort of, I don't know, it just
He's
seems
saying
like
Anna doesn't pass the smell
well,
test.
the smell test being, let's see, I mean, it is saying that they're not supposed to take a job if they're the one leading the search for it. It's pretty clear.
That's the way I would read it, but I suppose, you know, people can read different things with the same sentence, as you know. But it seemed like to me that I think that may be a conclusion that he ultimately reached. I don't know the man because, as was said earlier, he lasted before his first paycheck,
Yeah.
2 weeks, and
That's
he resigned. And I think that'll probably cure all the problems. I imagine when they get into it, they're going to say, hey, the guy was here 2 weeks. You can look at this either way. Let's move on.
You know, Desiree Timms, Jesse said that he was a choice over maybe a more conservative candidate for that job. A lot of people don't pay attention to the state school board and its relevance to their everyday lives, but it yet again is one of those things that actually does make a difference in people's everyday lives.
That's exactly right. I think if you ask any Ohioan across the state, hey, if you had the opportunity to collect all the resumes for your next job, and you looked at everybody's resume and then you decided, you know what? I want the job, and you go for it. Is that okay? I think most Ohioans would say, no, that's not okay. And that's the situation we have here. And I think anytime we have someone serving in public office or serving the public in any, you know, position, transparency has to be, you know, the cornerstone and the foundation of that.
Do we know if it's changed the trajectory of the search for his successor?
I know it has complicated it. Essentially, the person who was the interim before Steve Dakin got this job for a very short period of time has been leading the Ohio Department of Education's efforts since then. By all accounts, is a very competent person, but not someone that the board has expressly chosen to fill this role. And so it is complicated in this current environment to pick someone that enough people are going to agree on, because there has been an intense focus on education policy, whether that be, you know, talking about how we should educate on race or how we should educate on health or education. It's just, there's been a focus on this and education policy that really we didn't see very much before the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right, I think that the sweeping movements in education across the country mean that it would be really good to have a competent permanent leader for our schools at the moment.
Okay, let's move on. Ohio Democrats may see an unusual bump from the abortion issue, but Republicans are still in charge in the Buckeye State, from the General Assembly to Congress to every statewide elected office except the Supreme Court. And they're mostly in charge there, too. The question is, who should be in charge at the Ohio Republican Party? Brian Williams, the state party's vice chairman and head of the Summit County Republican Party, said he will challenge Chairman Bob Paduchik for the top job. That question has been put off now until January. So, Michael Miller, there's a rift here. Isn't it? Is it inevitable when one party controls so much, or is it a miracle it hasn't happened before, or is something else going on here?
You know, Ann, I don't know, except it just seems in this day and age there's fights about everything. When I went to law school, one thing I learned there, I don't think I knew it before, is reasonable people can disagree. That seems to be out in this country now. You can't. You're either one or the other and so forth. This reminds me, this inter-party fighting, like the Democrats in '68. You know, they were the crazy with, you know, Daley in Chicago and all that. This isn't that bad, of course. But I think we're acting like the Democratic Party, who's always been fighting amongst each other, all the way back to Will Rogers. You know, I'm not a member of any political party. I'm a Democrat, or whatever it was he said like that.
Organized party.
Organized party, yeah. And now the Republicans are doing the same thing. And obviously it doesn't do them any good. And I'm sure the Democrats are happy to see it. But again, do I think it's going to have any effect in the November election? I do not, or at least not in effect. It's going to be change who the winners and who the losers are. It may change the votes, how many votes you get, but I don't think it'll be a deciding factor at all.
I feel like Ohio is a bellwether, though, still in some ways, and in this, particularly among Republicans, this is the exact divide that's happening nationally. You have a group of Republicans that are backing Donald Trump and everything he says and does, and then we're seeing Republicans sort of flee from that, watching the various lawsuits and charges that he's facing and the problems he's still having as he gears up to run again, possibly against Biden. And so I think that he is a very divisive figure, and it's dividing the party here in Ohio too, which is, there are other things going on there, but I just think that the Democrats are divided in some ways too, with the far left progressives and the more moderates, but I do think that they have been recently coming together, deciding to hold their vote together in Congress, for example, on some of these big policy bills. And so the Republicans are a little more fractured than the Democrats at the moment.
And the idea about the group backing Donald Trump, it's a smaller group. It's the vote, Jesse Balmer today, to put off this issue of who's going to be the next chairman until January. It was clearly in Bob Paduchik's corner.
Yeah, it was.
But-
It was just an interesting contrast because on one hand you have this Intel groundbreaking where Ohio's top leaders and national leaders are there to celebrate this giant success in Ohio, and then on the other side of Columbus you have Republican leaders fighting over finances and endorsements and how the party should be led. And in some regards, it is crazy to split the country in half and then expect that neither party has any internal turmoil over that. But the Republicans used to not be this messy about it.
Well, for so many years, it was Bob Bennett out of Cleveland, ran the party for a couple different times for many, many years. And now it's been a series. Let's go back, Jane Timken, Matt Borges, and before that, was it Bob Bennett then? Before that?
Kevin DeWine.
Kevin DeWine, that's right.
Yeah.
The distant cousin of the governor. So a lot of change up. Does it, Desiree Timms, when it comes, what are your thoughts about how much this matters? It does matter, but is it too inside baseball?
I think the Republicans are having an issue with Donald Trump's absence, right? The reality is the country with the information age, more people have access to more information, and the extremism on both sides, but definitely in the Republican side of things is growing. And so what does that mean for how we govern, right? The Republicans control everything in this state. And so now you have this boom of folks who want more, or they want more extreme laws passed, and they're louder, and they all have platforms on this thing called the internet. And so I do think that the Republicans will continue to see this sort of roil their party until Donald Trump is back on the ticket or someone else is on the ticket and they all fall in line. What we saw is when Donald Trump was on the ticket, every Republican across the state and country, regardless of if they were a moderate or a light Republican, they all fell in line under Donald Trump and his extreme agenda, and now they have to live with it.
Well, actually makes a good point. There's no question that the party is split, and as Julie said, the Democrats have too. But what I'm saying is if the Trumpsters in the Republican Party don't like Mike DeWine, and many of them don't, they are not going to vote for Whalen. It's just not going to happen. They may not vote, but they're not going to switch party. And it's the same with the progressives in the Democrat Party. If they lose some particular fight inside the party, they're not going to vote for who the Republican is. They may not, stay away from whatever that candidate is. So again, I think it affects things, but I don't think it affects the final outcome.
Speaking of final, it is time for our final off the record parting shots. Let's start with Michael Miller.
I think the race for the Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court between Justice Brunner and Justice Kennedy is going to be a really interesting one, and probably for the first time in a long time, although I know the one a couple of years ago was big, 4 years ago, I guess. I think it's going to be really a race to watch. It'll be very, very interesting.
Julie Carr Smythe.
Secretary of State Frank LaRose has some interesting candidate issues still before him, where they are. These are folks who have not been put formally on the ballot, and those decisions need to be coming here in the next little while.
Because of the legislative redistricting.
Right, including not having a a Democrat in one of the state's most Democratic counties on the ballot for Ohio House.
Slight glitch. Desiree Timms.
Yeah, I think redistricting continues to be an issue, but we also made it through this entire conversation without talking about Tim Ryan and how he is still up in the polls and just absolutely crushing J.D. Vance, both in polling and in fundraising. So I'm excited for November to see if we will have another Democrat join Senator Sherrod Brown in the U.S. Senate.
And Jesse Balmer.
Former Ohio Governor hopeful Joe Blystone made a reappearance this week with some of his campaign finance mess. It's possible that he'll be referred for criminal charges.
And that's Columbus on the Record for this week. Continue the discussion on Facebook. You can watch every episode on demand at our website, wosu.org, or on the PBS video app. I'm Ann Fisher. Have a good week.